So hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, the first webinar in 2023 on the Stork managing and monitoring the Kia DHCP. My name is Carsten, and I will tell you a little bit about the Stork project and the product and what we can do with that. In my presentation, I will probably have about 15 minutes of slides, and I have two demos built in, live demos of the Stork system, and they will take each 10 minutes, so 20 minutes of live demos in there. And at the end, we have an extensive hands-on part where I've written down instructions how to install everything, starting with a Kia server, also a bind server, the PostgreSQL databases, and everything we need to have a Stork system running. And while I will cover that and I'll come back to that later on, but first, just let's dive into Stork. So in this webinar, we talk about what is Stork, and we will highlight some of the new features that we have in the latest version of Stork that came out in beginning of February this year, and especially the changes and the new stuff that is in Stork. Then we will have the first demo on these new features, and then I will cover a little bit the installation and configuration of Stork and the pitfalls that I have discovered when installing that, and I've seen at customer sites when customers try to install and configure Stork. We will talk about monitoring with Prometheus and Grafana, which is one of the features of Stork, and also having then a second demo on one of the big new features in Stork, which is the ability to manage DHCP reservations from the web GUI in Stork. And at the end, we have the hands-on lab part where we can play and test out Stork ourselves. So what is Stork? Stork is an open source monitoring and management system from ISC, and it's mainly for the Kia DHCP server, although there are a little bit of bind 9 functionalities in there. But the bind 9 functionality is mostly experimental at this point of time and not fully fledged out. There will probably be more on that later on. But for the time being, Stork is mainly a service for Kia DHCP. It has a modern web UI, looks nice, it's nice to use. And it also has a REST API where we can programmatically make changes to the Stork system. For example, creating new users in the system. Stork also provides a Prometheus exporter for both Kia DHCP and bind 9. Prometheus is a popular monitoring solution and time series database. However, Prometheus has just limited capabilities of visualizing the collected data, and that is where Grafana comes into place. Grafana is another project, an open source project that will take the data in the Prometheus database and create nice dashboards out of that. And I will show some of them in the demos. So here we have a picture of the Stork architecture, beginning with the Stork agent. The Stork agent is one of the components that makes up a Stork system. And the Stork agent is installed on every machine where we have either a Kia DHCP server or a bind DNS server. The Stork agent is written in the Go programming language, and when started, it will look around and it will automatically auto-detect the ISC products that are installed. So it will automatically detect a Kia DHCP that is installed, and it will also automatically detect the functions of the Kia DHCP that are enabled. So it knows whether the Kia is a DHCP v4 server or a v6 server or both, and whether the dynamic DNS component is being enabled. Stork doesn't, or the Stork agent doesn't talk directly to the Kia processes. Instead, it makes use of the Kia control agent, which is the API endpoint for the Kia DHCP server. So Stork is a consumer of the Kia DHCP API. On a bind DNS server, the Stork agent will find the named.conf file, the bind configuration file, and it will read about the RNDC control channel and the statistics channel. It will learn from that configuration file. And then it will use the statistics channel and the command channel to read data out of the bind process. For that to work, both the statistics channel and the RNDC channel need to be configured in the named configuration file. So that is the Stork agent. We can use the Stork agent without the Stork server, just as an exporter endpoint to the Prometheus time series database, and that can then export the metrics collected to the Grafana visualization. And a user will then log into Grafana to see the dashboards. We use that if we just want to read the status and we want to use monitoring functionalities from the Stork agent. This is a rather lightweight installation because it just requires the Stork agents on the servers. Or we can utilize the Stork server, which is the component that exposes a web user interface to the user, which can then be used to see all the events, all the stuff that is happening on the Kia DHCP server and on the bind server. And also it can be used to make changes to the Kia DHCP server, for example, to manage the reservations on the server. Installing the Stork server is a little bit more involved because it requires a PostgreSQL database. So you first need to have the database installed and configured and created, and then you install the Stork server and you register the Stork agents towards the Stork server. Or you make use of both functionalities. In this case, the Stork server will talk to the agent to remote control the Kia DHCP server to make changes and to read information from the Kia servers and the bind servers. And also Prometheus will talk to the Stork agent, but will use a different port and a different protocol, a different API to read statistics metrics from the agent, which the agent collects from the bind server and from the Kia DHCP server. For the user, this would be then two web interfaces, one web interface that is provided by the Stork server, and one web interface that is provided by the Grafana visualization framework. However, the Stork server knows about Grafana, and it will show a little icons, so you can directly branch out from the Stork server web UI into the Grafana dashboards. So there was a video on the Stork functions back in 2020, 2.5 years ago. And in this webinar, I don't want to repeat everything that has been said there. During my demo, in a few minutes, I will highlight the major function of Stork again, but I won't mention that here in the slides. However, if you are interested, I feel invited to revisit the YouTube video from the webinar in 2020, which is linked here. So one of the major new features in Stork since 2020 is the reservation management. And I will have a full dedicated demo on the reservation management here. This is how the page looks like. We see all the reservations. We see the hardware addresses or other identifiers that are being used for the reservations. We see the IPv4 or IPv6 addresses. In case of IPv6 prefix delegation, we see the IPv6 prefixes that are being assigned to the reservation. We see the host name, the subnet, and the instance of the Kia server that holds that reservation. And with the new host button here, we can easily create through the web interface a new reservation in the system. Another new function is the global search and the leases search. There is a search field on every page in the header of the Stork web user interface. And you can use that search field to type in any data or any search string that might be matched by any data that is in the Stork system. And that might be a subnet, that might be data that is stored with a reservation or with a lease, or a name of a machine, or a name of an application running somewhere. And while you type, the search functionality will already go through all the data that is collected by Stork and will present you with a preliminary selection of results that match the search string. And if you already find what you're looking for, you can then directly go to the links, the more links, or the directly visible links here. And that will bring you to the page where you can view and sometimes even manage these data. Another new function is the view log function, where we can inspect the log files that are hosted on the remote server, on the Kia server, from within the web interface. So when we use that function, the web interface will request the log files from the Kia agent, or the Stork agent, sorry, and the Stork agent will then talk through the control agent of Kia and will fetch the log files from the system, and it will display that in the web interface. That is a quick way to view the log files on the server without the need to remote logging into the Kia web server or a bind web server. If you have multiple log files configured in Kia, all of them will be shown. They will be auto-detected from the Kia configuration, and you can view them all from the web interface. On the main page, we have the responses per second statistics, which also are kindly similar to leases per second, but not completely, because responses can be more than just leases given out on the server. But it gives us a quick overview on how busy our DHCP server is, how many requests it has been responded to in the last 15 minutes, and how many responses it received in the last 24 hours. Also new are the configuration checkers. And the configuration checkers go through the configuration of the supported applications. Currently, that is for the Kia DHCP server, and it will look for misconfigurations or configurations that are not optimal. For example, the out-of-pool reservation will check whether there are reservations out of the pool, which are global reservations, and then it will warn about that or will make recommendations for better Kia configuration, for example, to speed up the lease processing in case of the out-of-pool reservations. So this can already catch misconfigurations that are being done on the servers. For troubleshooting purposes, it's possible to fetch important troubleshooting data directly from the server through the web interface. When we visit the host machines that are, or the application machines that are in the Stork system, we have the button dump troubleshooting data, and that reaches out to the Kia agent on the server, and it collects important information about the free memory, the CPU states of the machine, also the configurations of the server equipment there. And this can be either used by the ISC support team to better help support customers to find problems and issues in the system, but it can also be helpful for the administrator of a Kia system to get everything needed for troubleshooting directly through the web interface without the need to log in to the server, collecting all data on the server, creating a tar file and copying that back to a workstation. This is a much easier way to collect all the sensitive data needed for troubleshooting. Also new is the ability to view the JSON configuration of a running Kia application. This will fetch the configuration from the server and will display that nicely in a tree-way fashion here. And that makes it easy to look through the configuration without the need to really log into the server, open the JSON file with a text editor, and then go through that, which is a nice feature, I find, to quickly check the configuration of a server. Also, the DHCP exporter for Prometheus has been extended, and a new bind9 exporter has been imported into the Stork agent. The bind9 exporter is based on the popular and well-known bind exporter for Prometheus that is open sourced and created by DigitalOcean. And the bind9 exporter is built in now in the Stork agent, so it's not required to have an extra bind exporter running on the machine. It's all now covered by the Stork agent. So this is what's new. Now let's do a quick demo on the Stork system. So here we have the login page of a Stork system. This is a demo system that I prepared just for this webinar, so it doesn't contain a lot of information, but enough to show you around and give you a feel on how Stork works. So when we log in, we see the dashboard, which gives us the overview of our DHCP and DHCP v6 status here. We see the most utilized subnet, and we could, with the more buttons here, directly jump into a list of all the IPv4 subnets, and down here on all the IPv6 subnets in the system. We see the utilization and this button here with the arrow pointing up. This will directly branch out through Grafana on the same, or depending on the configuration where Grafana is being located. Down here in the service status, we see that all our DHCP servers are currently up and running. We see the responses per second, and if we have a high availability cluster configured, we would also see the high availability state, whether both cluster pairs are online and are working, or whether one cluster is not online, and if there's a failure in the high availability, that would be shown here. Also, we see the uptime, and these services are now up 2 days and 4 hours. On the right side, we see the last events, and events can be some reconfigurations on the system, but could also be some failures that have been detected in the system. In the DHCP menu here, we can go to the leases search. And this will allow us to search through all the leases in the system by, for example, IP address. Let me quickly show don't remember which leases I have put in here. There should be one. Oh, it's 101 possibly. 192.0 to 101. Okay, but yeah, sorry. But if there are leases in here, you could then search for either an IP address or a MAC address or a client ID or an IPv6 DU ID or the host name of the system. And that will present you the lease information. You can click on that lease information and see all the information, the current state of the lease, the type of the lease, and how long the lease is still in the system. I will cover the host reservations a little bit later. In the subnet overview, we see all the subnets in the system, how the utilization is for the systems, and it will also in color show when the subnet is running full, and it will create events for that. We can also have a look at the shared subnets, but I don't have any shared networks configured on this system. On the services part, we have a list of all the instances, the servers that are managed by the Stork system. We see the version number here of the Kia server that is running, and we see the different functions of Kia and whether the function is currently up and running and working without problems, or it would be shown in red if there are problems. From here, we can directly jump to the machine, which gives us an overview on the machine where the Kia server is running on. For example, we see the memory on the machine and how much the memory is utilized, what kind of system that is. This is a Linux system running a Rocky Linux 9.9.1. And down here, we can dump the troubleshooting data. Just a click. It then downloads the tar file, a zipped tar file, to the local file system of your workstation, and then you can inspect the troubleshooting data there. Here we see also the events, and there we see that on the 21st of February, the DHCP-v6 and DHCP-v4 services had a problem. They were unreachable for a certain amount of time, and later on they were reachable again. And in the middle, we see the applications, and here we see that besides the Kia server, there's also a bind 9.18.12 extended support version installed on the same machine. Here from the Grafana button, we can directly jump into the Grafana visualization. And let me do that quickly here. This loads up then the Grafana the website, which is on this instance installed on the very same machine. I'm logging in and have now the abilities to select my dashboards. I have three dashboards configured. One is the dashboard for bind, and the other ones are for the Kia DHCP server for v4 and v6. And I can then select one of the dashboards here. This is the v4 dashboard, but there's not much going on my machine here because it's just a demo machine. We see that there has been 104 requests on this machine because there's one DHCP client running, and we have also 104 acknowledges, but there were no discovers in the last 30 minutes. which is up here, where we can select the time frame. So I can go back to 24 hours or even last 2 days, and then see the differences there. The dashboards are fully customizable. You can rearrange the dashboards and also create new graphs in the dashboards with the functionality that is provided by Grafana. So going back to Stork, going here to the monitoring part, this is an overview of all the events being recorded from Stork. We can search, we can narrow down to just the error messages being collected, or error messages and warnings, or everything that includes the information as well. And we can drill down also on different machines or on different products. In the configuration bit here, we can create new users in the system, which are local users. Users can also be created through the API, so that can be automated. And we can see the review checkers, which test the configuration, reviews the configuration, and gives us information about possible misconfigurations. And let me show you how that looks like. If I go to the apps, or the Kia apps, I go to Kia app here, and if I scroll down, I see this Kia has one issue found in the reports, and there's an out of pool reservation, and it gives me the hint here that I could make changes to my reservation to optimize the configuration for out of pool reservations. I can list all the checkers here, and if I don't want to have a certain check running on a specific machine, I can disable this here. For example, if I don't want the checks for out of pool reservations on this particular instance of the Kia server, I disable it here and save the data down to the system. And then I can run a review update from here, and my issue is gone. It's created 6 reports, or checked 6 of the checker reports, and there's no issue currently. And lastly, we have the help, where we can directly jump to the Stork and bind in Kia manuals, and also have the ability to browse the API for Stork. For example, if we want to know how to create a new user account through the API, we go here into this documentation of the API, and then we see directly the JSON input that has to be sent to the Stork server, and an example of the return JSON that is being returned by the Stork server. This is very helpful for developers to create automation around the Stork system. Yeah, and this is the first part of my demo. We will come back to the demo showing the reservation feature in a few minutes. But first, let me talk a little bit about how to do a Stork installation. On the hands-on webpage that I've created for this webinar, there is a really extensive step-by-step guide how to install all the components that you need to run a Stork system. So it covers how to install Kia DHCP, it covers Bind9, it covers the Stork server, both the server and the agent, the PostgreSQL database and configuration, Prometheus and Grafana, everything on Red Hat Enterprise 9 and compatible systems such as Oracle Linux or Alma Linux. And most of the information also can be transferred over to Ubuntu systems or SUSE systems or other Linux derivatives. When we want to install Stork, we have the choice between installation from packages, manual installation so far that we configure the repository, which is like for the other ISC products on Cloudsmith. And we have there a choice between the open source, sorry, there's a typo in there, and the support subscription repositories. Ready-made packages are available for Red Hat compatible systems such as Fedora and Red Hat and Rocky Linux, and Debian compatible, which also includes Ubuntu and Alpine Linux. There's also an automated installation script that you can find in the Stork manual or reference in the Stork manual. And using that script, it will automatically configure the repositories for you, download the packages, and make sure that everything required is already pre-configured. In security-sensitive environments, I would recommend to download the scripts first and then inspect the scripts before executing them to make sure that they don't damage your system, especially if it's not a testing system, but a production system. There's also the option to install everything from container images. There are ready-made Kia containers and bind9 and Stork containers available on the Docker Hub, for example. But also, if you download the Stork source code, there is a demo available that you can easily start up, which pulls everything needed into a container environment and then starts the different processes up. And these container configurations used in the demo can also be used as a starting point to create your own container images. For example, with Docker or Podman or LXC or similar. If you want to use Stork, you need to have a PostgreSQL database. It works fine if you share the PostgreSQL instance between Stork and Kia DHCP, because Kia DHCP can also work with a PostgreSQL database. If you want to use Stork with PostgreSQL, it requires the PG Crypto extensions. The hands-on tutorials tells about how to enable that. PG Crypto is not required for Kia DHCP, but if you want to run Stork, it is required there. The Stork server and the agents are configured through either environment files or command line switches. There are no configuration files. Usually, and this is the default when you install the packages, there are environment variable files that then are injected into the process environment by systemd or similar service management systems. All the further configuration is then done through the web interface and is stored in the database. And here's an example of the environment file for the Stork server. It configures the IP address to listen on and the database port, the name of the database itself and the username that has access to the database. Whether we want to use the Prometheus metrics also on the Stork server itself, and the logging level that we want to use. For the Stork agent, it's also very similar, just that we don't have a database configuration there. Instead, we configure the Prometheus Kia exporter and bind9 exporter endpoints. If we use Stork in a non-trusted network environment, such as the internet, we can secure the communication between the Stork agents, which are running on the DHCP and DNS servers, and the Stork server with TLS encryption based on the X509 TLS certificates. We can use public certificates, certificates that we have gotten from a certificate authority, like Let's Encrypt or similar, or we can use a private certification authority or even self-signed certificates. The communication between the server, the Stork server, and the PostgreSQL database can also be secured with TLS encryption. There is a new tool called Stork tool, which is a command line utility that comes with the Stork server, and that can be used to import or export the certificates into the Stork configuration. The tool is also being used to maintain the Stork database. You can initialize the database with Stork tool. You can upgrade or downgrade even the database. Also new, there are now sample Grafana dashboard configurations available. And if you install the Stork server packages, you will find the JSON files for the Grafana dashboards in user share Stork examples Grafana. There are 3 files, one for bind9 and one for Kia DHCP4 and one for Kia DHCP v6. And they can be imported into Grafana with copy and paste. So you open the files in a text editor, you copy the content, then you open the Grafana dashboards, you select import and paste the JSON content into the import field, click on load, and then the dashboard is imported into your Grafana dashboard, and it will immediately start showing the data from your systems. This is how it looks like once imported. So managing reservations, we can manage reservations in an SQL database or in the Kia configuration file. The managing reservation function in Stork only works with the database storage. The Stork system and also the Stork agent can't or will not rewrite the configuration file on a Kia server, but it can make changes to this database. For that, we have to have the host database configured to be in a database on the Kia server. So this is a snippet from a Kia server configuration that points the host database towards the PostgreSQL server. However, on the Kia side, we can also use MySQL or MariaDB to store the reservations in the host database. Then, in order to be able to use the API endpoint on the Kia side to make host reservations, Kia requires the hosts command hook. And that is one of the subscription non-free hooks that are available from ISC. We need to configure that hook into our Kia server so that the hook is being loaded, as we see here in this configuration snippet. And once that is there, we can log into Stork, we can see the reservations, and we can create new reservations from there. And I will show you live how that works. So going here into the Kia server host reservations, and I get a list of my already existing reservations in the system. I select new host, and I can then select whether I want to have a global reservation or a reservation that is inside one subnet. I also can configure individual server values, or I can use the global server values. Then I select the Kia instance where I want to create the reservation. For this, I select the DHCP v4 instance. And from the DHCP v4 instance, I select a subnet. There's only one subnet in this instance, so that's an easy choice. Then I need the identifier for the reservation, and I have the choice between the hardware address, which is the MAC address, a client ID, a circuit ID, an IPv6 DU ID, or the flex ID. I stay with the hardware address and I use a made-up MAC address here. I then specify the host name for this reservation. This is the point of sale terminal. It gets an IPv4 address, and it tells me here it must be in that range because the subnet that I've selected is the 192.0.2 subnet. So I choose 192.0.277. Down here, I can then fill the bootp fields, next server, server host name, boot file name. I can select client classes if they exist. And I can add one or more DHCP options. For example, for this reservation here, I want to specify the DNS resolver. The DNS resolvers are on 192.0.253. And we have more than one DNS resolver in the network. So I'm adding a new IPv4 address, 192.0.2.153 is the second resolver. I can then select another option, maybe the NTP server. We find that one here, 42. I want that option always to be sent, even if the client doesn't request the option 42. And NTP service takes also an IP address, which is 192.0.2.123. And that's enough for this configuration, for this reservation. I save the reservation into the database. And there was a quick note in the upper right corner. And that note told us that the reservation is now being stored, but it might take a few seconds for the reservation to appear here in the view, even if I click on refresh list, because the configuration on the remote side is always the source of truth here for the Stork system. And it waits now for the next synchronization interval between the Stork server and the Stork agent and the database. So after a few seconds, when the next reservation has happened, the new reservation will then appear here in the host reservation list. There it is. There is the point of sale terminal. So this was the demo and also the end of the presentation part of the webinar. The upcoming next webinars, we will stay with Kia DHCP. In March, we talk about the vendor option and how to configure vendor options with Kia DHCP. In April, we have Netbox, which is an open source IP address management solution, and how Netbox can be integrated with Kia DHCP to automatically reflect the IP addresses managed in Kia DHCP also in the IP address management part. In May, we talk about migrating to Kia from IC DHCP, and in June, we present the new dynamic template feature that will be in Kia by that time. And with that, let's see if we have any questions.
There were a few questions as you went through the demo, Carsten. I think mostly we've answered them, but let's see. Torburn, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. Said, I'm missing the wildcard search here. I think this is when you were doing, showing the search through the subnets, if you recall that. I'm not sure if he was looking for a wildcard in the middle of an IP address or what precisely. Maybe he can update his question. I know, if you start typing in an IP address, it will do a partial search, but I don't know if you can put a wildcard in the middle of the string. Do you know?
No, I don't know either.
Okay, we had another question from Dan. Is there anything significant in the data model in the back end? For example, does the data model allow for linking different data elements together, like devices and sites? And I know that we did discuss specifically, actually, adding site codes of some sort to several of the displays, where you're viewing subnets or machines. And the problem was always the screen real estate, partly because, some people who asked us for a site wanted like a 20-character string. Other people might perhaps be okay with a numerical code. Anyway, it was hard to come up with a generic solution, but as Dan suggested, we could perhaps permit people to add this site information in the data model independently of figuring out how to display the information in the GUI, and that could be a future step. And that does seem like a good idea. And of course, we could perhaps make that information available via the REST API, even if it's not in the GUI. We had a question from Chris. Can the Kia configuration checker categories be disabled globally in addition to the per machine deselect?
Yes.
And yes, they can. Aaron asked, can home users or lab users access the paid hooks for, I assume what he means, for free. And the answer to that is our current system, we don't really have a free option. We do have for the paid hooks, we have a tiered pricing depending on how many leases. This is online on the ISC website. The host commands hook is part of the premium package, which you can, just buy in a one click. And, if it's for nonprofit as well, you have the lowest price for that. But if you have some other situation you want to talk about, just email us at info@isc.org.
Let me add to that I also use Stork in my home environment. I don't have the non-open source host commands installed there. Stork will still display the reservations. You can't make changes to the reservations and you can't create new reservations without the host commands, but you still see them. That might already help. At least for me, it's enough, because at least in my home network, reservations don't change so often. It's more that I need to look them up from time to time, and Stork helps with that. Changes have to be then done directly on the server in the Kia configuration file if you want to make changes to the reservations.
Okay, yeah. So the host commands hook is really optional. There's another question. Will the Kia DDNS agent update the DNS server with the A and the point of records for the host reservation? And yes, it will, if that's what it does, basically.
Main purpose.
Yeah, I think that's it. So Darren has corrected me that he says the lease search does not appear to accept wildcards or partial IP addresses. I guess that's the, that's in the lease search. I was thinking,
The global search. that does-
yes, in the global search, I know you can search for partial IPs, but, so I'm corrected on that on the lease search. So that's it for the questions.
Very good. Thank you. So for the hands-on parts, I have this webpage here, which I've also opened here. And I will put in names of the participants here that want to participate. Yes.
I think I'll turn off the recording now, just because
Yes,
there's not any purpose in having this, this part in the recording. So I'll just
right.
cut off that bit.